Chapter 5 Hateno Fortress. The rhythm of properly shod hooves ringing gently on the road was a nostalgic sound, and Zelda could not have guessed at where that feeling of nostalgia came from. That was a curious sensation, and she knew what it was, but she hadn't felt it since waking up in the chamber. Higher? Why yes. Prin, yes, Zelda? When you feel nostalgic about something, do you usually relate it to specific memories from your childhood? I have that feeling now, but I can't relate it to any specific moment in my past. At any other moment I would argue that nostalgia and memory are too closely related to be separated, but this suggests otherwise, I think. I'm afraid I don't understand. Zelda barely heard her. It hadn't been an actual answer to her question, and though it would have embarrassed her to realize that she had filtered Pai's puzzlement out entirely. It suggests the question of how much I do remember. I remember how to talk, to walk, to eat. I am not reduced to the state of a newborn. But I remember nothing of myself, of any moment in the past. Can one know things that are not recalled? Is there a difference, then, between knowledge and memory? And if the two are separated, on which side of the divide would nostalgia fall? Pai nearly shrieked in sudden alarm, but the look Zelda threw over her shoulder was anything except for alarmed. Irritated, perhaps, in a quiet place that she would not let Pai see because it would hurt the other woman very badly. She applied the gentlest pressure to the reins of her horse, and the mare slowed down enough to draw alongside Pai's. Pai's horse was cream and blue like milky clouds against the sky, and covered in spots. Zelda's own had a roan coat, nearly solid. Both were of an even temperament, so gentle that a child could ride them, if they had confidence about it. Soothe the horse when it starts, Zelda said to her, and Pai nodded for something like the third time. If you're nervous, it will be nervous, too. You need to reassure it. It will convince the horse of how you want to feel, and it will help to convince you too. Pai leaned forward, too far forward. She barely knew how to balance herself in the saddle, but when she stroked the horse's neck her hand was firm, the motion even and gentle. I'm sorry, she said, and it was impossible to tell if she was talking to Zelda or the horse. Grandmother taught me all sorts of things, but I never learned how to ride. This is all new to me, and I am not a very good learner. I'm sure she understands, Zelda said, and did not take her eyes off of Pai until the other woman was seated properly again. Catching, taming, and registering the horses had taken the best part of a day, though she was sure it would end up paying dividends. Pai had been too afraid of going near them, afraid of being kicked, and in fairness, one of them had nearly taken Zelda's head off when she had spooked it by moving too suddenly, so Zelda had attended to the matter herself. She was still wearing the Sheikah-made stealth suit, which was both as useful as advertised and surprisingly breathable. She had pulled a mask down to rest under her chin because it made it slightly hard to breathe and the condensation of her breathing made the effect worse, but she appreciated the armor's craftsmanship. When they ended up stopping for the night, she would change again and really examine the armor, try to understand the mechanics of it. However it did what it did was worth understanding. She never would have been able to catch the horses without it. The road curved gently around an enormous rock face, itself very nearly a mountain, and she found that her anticipation at what might be around the corner built as they rode. The horses went at a slow walk. She didn't want to put them to the test until they had all had time to grow more comfortable with each other, but the possibility of what lay just out of sight was so wild, so enticing, that it took an effort not to urge the mare into a full gallop. She could feel the potential of its speed as it shifted under her. Before long, she would give it all the lead it needed. Patience for now, and patience for a while yet. The distance fell away, length by length. She pulled the mask back up, found that the condensation of her breath had been wicked to the outside, hoped that the mask would be enough to hide her excitement from Pai. After an interminable length of time they rode past the stone, and Zelda looked outward and to the south, and her breath caught in her throat and she eased her horse to a stop. The Blatchery Plain, Pai said, stopping a little more abruptly beside her. The site of the champion's last stand. Zelda said nothing in reply, at first. The entire field was littered with guardians in various states of disrepair or destruction, most dead and inert and missing their legs. In the far distance, much further south than they intended to ride, a single stalker walked on long, reaching legs, casting its glowing blue eye all about it, searching for some hapless prey. It stood in contrast to the fields of ruin, never coming too near to it, as if the presence of its fellows and their annihilation had been enough to warn it off. There must be thousands, she said at last. Grandmother would know the exact number, Pi said. A moment later she added, or Nana. I don't know exactly what happened. I like heroic stories, but this one. She let that trail off, abandoned it. Regardless, I think it best if we stick to the road. That battle ended a century ago, but a handful of the Guardians persist and will attack anything that wanders too near. There's a bokoblin camp near the western edge, if you look, and you can tell where the functioning Guardians are by the extent of their... She looked at Zelda. The trolls. Zelda? Zelda looked out at the Guardians, lightly touched at the edge of her armor, and thought. I was just thinking about this armor, about how it works. It deadens footfalls, doesn't rustle in spite of being made of cloth, even the sound of my breathing is softened. Someone could tell me how it works, if nothing else. We could go back to Kakariko village and Clary would be able to tell me about the methods of its construction. This armor is a mystery to me, and I wish to know the answer to it, but that answer is less urgent because I know where I can get it. Do you see? Paya shook her head. Zelda suspected that the other woman did see, even if she did not wish to. I wonder by what mechanics the Guardians function. That was not the whole truth. She hungered for it, yearned for it more than thirst made her yearn for water. By what means do they project beams of light that can burn and burst? How are they still functional after a century of being exposed to the elements? If they are from the same era as the Sheikah slate, then would understanding them also mean I would better understand it? This last was folly and vanity, and she knew that. They were headed to a laboratory run by a woman who had been poring over this very question for more than 100 years. The font of knowledge available to her would not be as comprehensive as that for the armor she wore, but in many ways it could be more profound. Why place so much emphasis, so much importance, on her own experience? Princess, Paya said, in a voice that was both shaky in sudden terror and trying so hard to project authority that Zelda turned to look at her with raised eyebrows. We cannot try to dismantle one of the functioning Guardians. At the look on Zelda's face, which was more surprise or curiosity than anger, Zelda was sure. She nearly quailed, but still she managed to hold eye contact. We can't. It's very dangerous. There are bokoblins wandering nearby. Too many for us to kill them without being seen. Now Zelda set her jaw, and it had nearly the effect she wanted on the other woman. I have spent the past several days sneaking around or eliminating beasts like these are much worse, Paya. Even if we were detected, and to be clear we would not be, I am confident we could outfight them. That was foolhardy, dangerous, stupid, but she also thought it was true. Even ignoring Paya's own absurd strengths, Zelda knew that she was not physically the same person who woke up with their memories missing. She was not an expert with the sword, but she knew enough about the bokoblins and how they thought and fed and fought that she knew that, if it came down to it, she could fight one. Hopefully more. There are a lot of them. You said yourself that they do not go too near the active Guardians. Staying outside of their patrol range should be simple. Paya looked ready to argue the point about being able to fight one of the beasts. We considered, let it go in the span of seconds. Even so. Dismantling a Guardian is... It's not impossible, but it requires tools we don't have. You can test it on one of the dead ones, if you want. Their armor is so thick that you can't damage it with normal steel, and their vitals are so well protected that you would need to strike perfectly into their eyes to create openings. She shook her head. They're fascinating, yes. But part of that is because they are from an age that produced weapons like them. You would need some sort of equivalent to fight them, otherwise they... Zelda held out a long, rectangular object that was proportioned like the handle of Paya's own eightfold blade, only its construction was identical to the Guardian's, all stone set against darker stone. She shifted her fingers over the grip, and a thin segment of it separated from it, flipped upward. This part hummed into life, and a blade of bright blue light materialized. The glow it gave off was pleasant to look at, but one could almost feel the danger of it as Zelda turned it in her hand. Where? Paya's question was less curiosity than disbelief. The shrine above the village. The monks have many gifts, for those who can complete their trials. Paya groaned, burying her face in her hands. The Guardian flared to life as Paya stepped within its range. The deep thrum of its sensors coming online was a note that reverberated in her head, in her very bones. She drew her A-fold blade, positioned her shield on her offhand, waited for it to look at her.
"Princess!"
The sound made the guardian swing its head over to her, away from Zelda, who was somewhere in the forest of dead guardians on its opposite side.
"The beams of light are not actually beams in the same way that some beams are. They are pulses that leave trails of light behind them, like comets."
She didn't think that would actually be important, but it was something to say. Maybe the princess would think it mattered, though. It was hard to predict what connection Zelda could make. The red light focused on her, and she closed her eyes. She recited the lesson that Nana had taught her, because she had always wanted to know how people could possibly fight things that could kill with a glance.
"Don't mind the light. Listen to it. The charge builds, and builds, and when it's ready there will be a chime."
Her leg shook beneath her, and for one moment she was greeted with the question of what would happen if she suddenly had a cramp now. Would she be completely vaporized? Oh, that wasn't pleasant. She shouldn't have thought about that. Now she was going to be sick. The chime was a deep sound, too, followed by an inhalation of breath, both by her and by the guardian. The world lit up through the lids of her eyes. The light had aimed at her chest. She slid under it like a water sprite, already charging, her body nearly parallel to the beam as the pulse struck an object behind her and detonated with the force of 20 of Zelda's bombs. The wind pushed at her back as she ran, her grip on the blade shifting, her eyes wide and unblinking. She made eye contact with the guardian as the red light focused on her again. It began to chirp as it acquired its target. She leaped into the air, and the red light tracked her as she sailed toward it. The guardian was too slow. Paya slammed into its head, driving the tip of her sword against its eye. The tip shivered, nearly broke, then skidded off the glowing red glass. She hissed through her teeth. She had expected to do some damage, rather than none. The thing groaned beneath her, something inside of it grinding together as its eye lost focus and its head began to turn, tracking as if it had lost its target.
"Zelda,
ah!" But Zelda was already moving. Zelda did not run like Ashika did. She had never been taught to run properly, probably didn't realize there was a proper way to run, but when she moved now it was like she was flying, taking strides longer than Paya would have thought possible, arms pumping and body leaned forward. In this way she was unrefined, but the intensity of her body language, the look in her eyes as she focused solely on a spot on the back of the guardian's head, sent a shiver running up Paya's spine. The machine recovered and Paya struck its eye again, less firmly so that her blade did not skip but still hard enough to disorient it. Zelda scrambled up its back, the guardian blade flaring to life in her hand. She swung artlessly but firmly, from her shoulder, a motion almost like a butcher cutting through bone as she hacked at the back of the guardian's head. Paya could not see what effect she was having, but she heard it, a sound like breaking porcelain as blue sparks sprayed out against Zelda's face. The princess never flinched, never looked away. The sword was pulled back and then brought down, back and down, back and down. They had agreed that Paya would make sure the eye was disabled, but that she would not place her body in front of it in case something went wrong. This had been Zelda's idea, though Paya had agreed to it readily, eagerly, and it saved her life as the guardian's weapon fired, bright blue death lancing out across the field without warning, without charging. "Ach!" She scrambled away from it, made ready to swing at the eye with her sword, but when Zelda struck at the guardian again the weapon fired once more, the head still trying to rotate, and this time the eruption of power was much closer, the wind from the explosion blowing Paya's hair as if she were in a storm.
"Zelda, I think it's firing every time you strike it."
"I think you should stop," Kitgoan said, surely. If only it couldn't, and Zelda began hacking with renewed fervor, at even greater insistence.
"Get away from it, Paya."
"What?" The sound of the weapon discharging over and over, not able to keep up with the rapidity of the princess's blows, was high and shrill and not unlike a monster's scream.
"I said, get away."
Zelda looked at her, then, and the intensity in her eyes, the command in her voice, was unlike anyone Paya had ever seen. Her grandmother would have quailed at that look.
"If I'm causing this to happen, then I must be near to the vital components. I need be only a little deeper, but it's too dangerous to have both of us up here."
She was so sure that for a moment Paya believed her, nearly moved to obey.
"Then let me do it."
Paya covered her ears, stepped around the shuddering weapon's head, made as if to grab for the weapon. Only she didn't dare. If Zelda fought her for it, and she would, then the guardian might have time to turn toward them. There was no telling if it would be able to fire at them without needing to charge, and if it did then they were both as good as dead. Zelda flipped the blade in her hand so that it projected out from the bottom of her fist, then jammed the tip directly into the opening she had managed to cut. The Guardian stopped firing but began to emit a high-pitched grinding squeal, as if something inside of it were jammed, and Zelda let go of the blade, turned to Paya.
"Please?"
She was not pleading, but she was asking as insistently as she could, reaching out and taking both of Paya's hands in hers. Despite herself, in spite of how ridiculous it was, Paya felt the color rise in her face at having the princess ask her to do anything.
"Paya, will you trust me to face the calamity?"
Why yes, Zelda. Of course she would. Of course that was the only thing she was thinking about while this death machine was writhing under their feet.
"Then trust me in this. Retreat, just a little way. If you think that I am in danger, pull me away from it. But otherwise, leave me to this work. I am so close and would know these secrets. Please, please."
Something happened, then, as Zelda pled with Paya, as the sun was going down and the blue light beneath and around them was growing brighter, as the Sheikah woman quaked in front of her liege. She did not know what it was, but Paya knew it was important, that something inside of her shifted.
"Yes, Your Grace,"
she said, and when Zelda released her hands she bowed low and leaped away from the Guardian. Zelda gave no time to hesitation. She turned back to the Guardian, drew the Guardian sword out, and continued to chop at the enormous gash she had created. The machine began to fire again, and Paya watched as Zelda cut away at the interior of the gash, widening it more and more, and she could not see clearly, but from where she stood the Guardian seemed to be filled with blue light and the heaving of some strange, alien life. Then Zelda struck again, and the armor broke under the stress in a much larger section, and the chop went deeper than she had anticipated. The blue of the blade cut into the brighter blue of the Guardian's insides, and something very audibly broke, a crack, and a whir, and a burst of blue flame that spewed out of the wound and licked at the air in front of Zelda's face. The princess did not even flinch.
"Oh, curse you,"
the princess said, and the Guardian began to billow smoke from its joints.
"Delta."
Light shone from out of the Guardian as its armor began to crack, rays of blue light as bright as the sun, and Paya's legs coiled under her as she judged the distance for reaching Zelda in a single leap. Would she be able to kick off far enough to be safe while carrying the weight of another person? It didn't matter. She had to try. Then Zelda turned and leaped off herself, directly toward Paya, and the suddenness of her movement caught her attendant so badly off guard that Paya could not react to it. The Guardian seemed to be composed wholly of light for one brief, brilliant second, lighting up the world as if it were noontime. Zelda tackled Paya to the ground just as the Guardian exploded, sending a geyser of fire and earth and stone into the air. I should really be protecting her, Paya thought, almost delirious, as Zelda shifted her shoulder to shield Paya's face from falling debris, and Paya held her shield behind Zelda's head. Zelda's grip on her was firm, almost immovable, and she reacted not at all to the rain of pebbles and soil that fell around them and onto Zelda's back. The blessings of Hylia had strengthened her more than anyone in the village had thought possible. Seconds later there was silence, and stillness, and Zelda lifted her head to look around.
"Well, it's gone, no more danger, at least."
Then she looked down, and their closeness, noses nearly touching, made the heat rise in Paya's face again.
"Are you hurt?" "No, Your Grace,"
she said.
"Zelda. Sorry."
She was mostly surprised she had managed to get the words out at all.
"No,"
Zelda said, slowly getting up.
"I'm sorry. I dug too deeply, too greedily, and it was so close though. I could see inside of it for just a moment, and it was as if it was calling out to me, ready to divest itself of knowledge we haven't had for so long, and..."
She closed her eyes, shook her head, and her dejected posture became resolute.
"It doesn't matter. I made a mistake. It won't happen again."
She turned to Paya, offered her hand.
"I promise." "I understand,"
Paya said, because she did. Maybe she should have been angry, maybe in other circumstances, with other people, she could have been. But watching Zelda charge the Guardian, the surety of her body language, the openness of her expression, even wearing that mask, her eyes could tell so much. And then, the unnameable quality that was communicated just by her presence. Paya had heard what it meant to be a person of destiny before, not a person chosen by fate, but a person who rises to greatness as it is required of them. She had heard all of that, but before today she had never really known. She took Zelda's hand, and in the touch of their fingers realized what had changed in herself. Oh. They took the time to gather up large pieces left behind by the explosion. When they finally returned to their horses, Zelda had 2 sacks full of screws, springs, and various other parts that could not be as easily identified. These she tied to either side of her saddle, trying to distribute the weight evenly, before mounting again. Both were tired and rode in silence for the rest of the way. The sun was setting, and it would be dark soon, but both of them agreed they could not sleep in the field. The Bokoblin encampment and its sentries not being alerted to their presence was a matter of luck, despite Zelda's earlier argument, and they could not rely on that luck holding through the entire night. The walls of Fort Hateno rose in the distance, and Zelda was taken aback once more by the sight of its guardians, some of them nearly whole, lay in frozen ruin all over it, apparently destroyed in the midst of assault. Breaking just one of them had left her arm numb with the effort, and that with a weapon apparently designed to fight them. What force of people could have pushed back so mightily against them? What army was so powerful? There was a clear space in front of the fort where the grass was dead. It was easy to see from far away, but the rolling land surrounding it made it hard to get any kind of perspective. Zelda hadn't had the energy to wonder at it when seeing it from a distance. As they drew closer, she could feel alertness creeping back into her, replenishing the vitality that the fight with the Guardian had drained. What is this? Zelda, a length ahead of Paya, slowed to a stop in the center of the clearing. Paya pulled up next to her, waiting patiently as her charge took in the sight. The clearing was wide and dead, and almost perfectly circular, its edges so clean-cut that it was as if a curse with a very specific diameter had been placed on the spot where Zelda's horse now stood. No guardians, broken or functional, stood within the circle. One was seated on the edge, but an entire side of it was cut away, revealing the hollow shell where its innards had once resided. It was hard to tell from elsewhere on the plains, but here Zelda saw that there were great holes in the landscape, circular openings in the mountains like spy holes, one from the southwest, one from the northwest, one from directly north, unless she was badly mistaken, there was a missing sliver on a hill to the west. Thousands or millions of tons of stone had been displaced or vaporized, and trying to imagine the power capable of such a thing made her head hurt. Something happened here. I do not know what, but I know that it made this place, this spot, into a nexus of destruction. She found herself wishing more and more desperately to remember. They rode on. The stars were coming out when they passed through the ruined gate of the fortress wall, and Zelda looked up at the broken crenellations there, craning her neck to see where the reaching arms of a dying guardian had sunk claws into the stone. Many of them had met the end there, at the wall. Not one had made it over. A tree stood near the gate, tall and with a wide-reaching canopy, good for shelter in weather of all kinds. At the foot of the tree, a little way from the trunk, a man sat tending to a fire on which he had set a cooking pot. Paya nearly seized up at the sight of him. This did not mean he was a Jaeger, it just meant he was a man. But when he saw them his eyes lit up and he had an eager, open honesty to his expression that made Zelda instantly like him. There was something about him that spoke to her. She could feel his need to share in some secret knowledge, and that spoke to her own desires quite nicely. The two slowed to a stop, and he raised his hand in greeting.
Name's Garl. You two here to see Fort Hateno, too?
Ah, so that is the place's name. Was it manned by the people of Hateno village, 100 years ago? Are all of them descended from heroes?
My name is Zelda, and my companion is Paya.
Paya nodded, and it was emotion so nervous it bordered on curt.
Asked your question. Yes,
she said, the lie coming so easily because now it was true.
Though I'm afraid I know precious little about it. There are so many machines out there, broken, and not even one on this side of the wall. It seems as if a great army must have fought them back.
Garl's eyes lit up in a way that Zelda suspected would look quite similar to her own face, his grin wide and encompassing and just the slightest bit arrogant.
Well, there's a very good story there, if you'd care to hear it. Would the two of you like to share the fire?
Zelda looked to Paya, who had blanched utterly, her expression drained of all color. She was too mortified to say that they shouldn't, but several degrees too terrified to say that they should, which meant it was solely up to Zelda, who turned back to Garl with her own smile.
We would hate to impose. Not at all. It's good to have company, and nowadays it's usually safer to have more folks around the fire. Monsters don't tend to come too near to the gate, but you never know, I'd be glad to host you.
Zelda dismounted, then helped Pi do the same.
We have some food that we could prepare while you tell us the story, if you'd permit us use of your cookbot. Please, be my guest. I've already eaten, so you don't need to worry about me.
They threw onto the fire cubed venison, chopped Hyrulean herb, and great chunks of rock salt. The smell was instantly and ferociously appetizing, and Zelda realized she had skipped that lunch she'd been anticipating. No matter. Pi took on the duty of agitating the food with a wooden spoon, so Zelda turned to Garl, who had leaned back to recline against the tree.
He mentioned a history.
Garl looked off into the middle distance with unfocused eyes and the sort of relaxed posture that suggested someone who relished sharing the knowledge he had accumulated.
Have you heard the story of the hero and the princess who fought here? I haven't,
Zelda said, though Pi stiffened in a way that told her that Pi did know the story, and for some reason was worried about her hearing it.
Would you tell me?
He nodded, looking directly at Zelda, his eyes going between her and Pi as he talked, Pi looking down, pointedly, every time he looked her way.
So 100 years ago, we had these special warriors called champions. This hero was supposedly one of them, and the princess was their leader. When the calamity struck and brought ruin to Hyrule, the hero and the princess made their last stand here, at Fort Hateno. Most of the Hyrulean military had been pushed back into Akkala, leaving Hateno without its regular defenders. So when the hero and the princess fought here, it was by themselves. 2 people.
The force of the question cut through Garl's relaxed recitation, the weight of Zelda's disbelief so sudden and stark it nearly spooked the horses.
All of that out there, all that destruction, all those broken machines, that was the work of 2 people.
I did that. She had thought Garl might be shocked at her outbursts, but instead he seemed pleased at her disbelief, at the enormity of the story he was telling.
We can't know if that's true or not. There are enough broken weapons out there to suggest that some of the army was here, and fell in the battle. But the story goes that the hero and the princess stood alone, even if it was only at the end. The hero was supposed to be the mightiest of the champions, with a magical sword that cut through darkness, and the princess...
Here he stopped, thinking to himself.
I've never really understood her story well enough to relate it. The SSA.
Pi said, her voice so quiet that it was almost impossible to hear her, but surprisingly firm considering it was the first time she'd spoken since the Guardian exploded.
That the princess fought with the power of the GG goddess herself. That she leveled a heavenly blessing against the calamity.
Garl nodded, though something about Pi plainly made him wary. Was she that strange?
That makes as much sense as anything I've heard. None of the accounts seem to agree with each other. What they do agree on is how the battle ended. It seemed like the princess and the hero would turn the tide of the battle, maybe the whole war, when the calamity itself descended on them.
He pointed toward the gate.
You saw that big circle of dead grass on your way here. They say that's where the calamity attacked the hero and the princess.
Zelda looked that way, as if she could see through the wall of the fort out to the sky-lit clearing beyond it. The holes in the mountain surrounding it, the persistent death of that spot, the perfectly destroyed Guardian at its edge. Perhaps, another part of her mind reasoned, she should be reeling at this information. She was now passing through a place where she had failed, in some way. This was a place of almost unbelievable importance, of weight so terrible it hung in the air like smoke, and she did wonder at it, but more than that she was curious. Greater than her fear, greater than the possibility of shame, she wanted to know, to remember, to be able to recall the images of what had transpired in that blasted plain. Had the calamity caused the destruction there? Or had she?
What happened then?
Here Garl shrugged, and it was apologetic.
No one really knows.
Pi made a soft sound, the Sheikah knew, apparently, even if they were not sharing. Garl did not catch this, continued on.
The princess is supposed to have fallen in battle against the calamity, and the hero fought on alone, forcing it all the way back to Hyrule Castle. They say he still fights there, and on some nights you can hear him using his magic sword to keep the darkness at bay.
He shivered visibly.
And the princess?
Pi said, still quiet, just loud enough to be heard.
The princess is supposed to have died,
Garl said. He leaned his head all the way back, looked up at the boughs of the trees, and now he seemed distant, too.
Some say that she isn't dead, though, that she was taken away to a secret place and made to sleep until her wounds are healed and she can return to save the kingdom. If that's true, she'd still be alive, wouldn't she?
He believed this, utterly. His voice told the entire story, how he had no reason to believe but his faith drove him forward anyway.
I hope I'm still around when she wakes up. I'd love to see her, one day.
Thank you for the story, Zelda said, and nothing else. She had nothing else in her. They drizzled goat butter onto the meat to aid in browning it at the end, to deepen the flavor and add a bit of much-needed oil and fat to the lean venison. It was ready a few minutes after, and they had enough for 3 very generous portions. The 3 of them ate together in companionable silence, their Paya sat very close to Zelda and markedly far away from Garl. When they were finished and all their cookware and utensils packed away, Paya said,
Why you two can sleep? I'll take it at first watch.
Garl accepted this happily, bid them good night and lay next to the fire, his back to them, but Zelda looked at Paya with raised eyebrows. Seeing the question there, Paya leaned in close, said softly in Zelda's ear,
I only need 4 hours. It's early, you'll have enough time to rest before I wake you up.
Zelda looked at Garl sleeping, realized what this was about, thought about the story he had told and the way he had told it. Their cheeks brushed together as she spoke into Paya's ear, I trust him. When she leaned back, Paya was blushing furiously, her face so red that Zelda thought she might be in danger of passing out. Instead, she only nodded and said,
I know.
And it doesn't matter. So Zelda bid her good night and lay next to the fire, and Paya took her seat. The princess tried to sleep, heard her attendant scratching notes into a book. Probably notes on the day and on the journey. She'll need to make reports to Impa on our return. Sleep did not come to her, not at first, though the fire was warm and she felt absurdly, ludicrously safe. What was it about being amongst history that made her feel bodily secure? Did she think that the ghosts of the past would stand watch over her with the same devotion and constancy as Paya? Did she imagine the echoes of the hero wandering this place, keeping evil at bay? Did she imagine her own? Did she imagine herself, wielding the power that failed? Garl had said he wanted to meet her, had spoken of her with surety and faith and patience. There was something there, a quality of trust, that spoke to something deep in her chest, pouring water onto an old, dry heart so that it could open and be raw and new again. Why did she feel that way? Why was it that the thought of this man's faith was leaden in her chest? What if I fail again? Far, far in the distance, beyond the wall, beyond the plain, beyond the interposing hills and mountains, a blue light leaped into the sky. She could not hear it with her ears, but an ancient voice's song reverberated on a level that was deeper than flesh, deeper than the dreams where she spoke to Hylia. She could feel the weight from there, this duty, this fear. Garl was waiting for her. How many others had been? How many had died waiting for a princess who might never come back to them? I will ask Paya to teach me to use the sword. She slept, and it was exhausted and deep and dreamless under a clear sky. The moon hung in the air, a great eye watching them, clear and yellow, white and unclouded. A roar built within the earth. End of chapter.